Beneath Rome's cobblestones lies a graveyard of civilisations, stacked, shattered, and repurposed. Step into any alley and you're walking on time. Ancient paving stones worn by chariot wheels lie under Renaissance vaults, which themselves now creak beneath the weight of the modern world. But before emperors, popes, or poets, there was only fire. Rome begins not with myth, but magma. The 7 hills were born of ancient eruptions, their volcanic soil rich enough to feed empires. Yet nothing about this spot guaranteed greatness. The Tiber flooded unpredictably. The terrain was swampy, the coast distant, the neighbours warlike. Still, somehow, this unremarkable bend in a muddy river drew humanity like iron filings to a magnet. It built up, burned down, rebuilt again, each age layering over the last like geological strata. Rome is not just a city, it's a palimpsest, a place where the past refuses to stay buried. Streets align with vanished temples, churches sprout from pagan ruins, sewers still follow Etruscan blueprints. How did molten rock become marble sculptures? How did a handful of huts on a riverbank become the head of a world? And more curiously, why do empires seem to circle back here, trying to rebuild Rome in its own image? Long before swords clashed or senators schemed, Rome was raw geology. The city's story begins beneath the Earth's crust, in the fiery belly of an ancient volcanic complex known as the Alban Hills. Around 600,000 years ago, a series of violent eruptions reshaped the landscape of central Italy. Lava flowed, ash blanketed the ground, and the 7 famous hills, Aventine, Palatine, Capitoline, and their siblings, began to rise from molten chaos. These hills weren't chosen for settlement by chance, they were the byproduct of tectonic fury, forming natural ridges above the flood-prone Tiber Valley. But this devastation laid the groundwork for abundance. Volcanic ash, once cooled and weathered, became nutrient-rich soil. Over time, dense forests took root, oak, laurel, and pine carpeting the slopes, sheltering wolves, deer, and early humans. Springs bubbled up from fractured rock, and the Tiber, unpredictable but vital, carved a lifeline through the terrain. By 100,000 BCE, bands of hunter-gatherers roamed this landscape. They tracked herds through the low hills and left behind flint tools, bone fragments and charcoal smudges in caves near what is now Rome. These weren't city builders, but their footprints mark the first chapter in a place that would one day rule the known world. Around 10,000 BCE, as the last ice age receded, the Tiber's rhythms shifted. Floodplains widened. Marshes formed in the valleys between the volcanic hills. In this rich, soggy cradle, early agricultural communities would one day take hold. The very soil under Rome, dark, fertile, volatile, promised growth but demanded respect. It shaped how humans settled, planted, and worshipped. And still, the land held secrets. Even in prehistoric times, the area brimmed with mythic potential. The hills cast long shadows at dusk. Earthquakes occasionally rattled the region, reinforcing a sense of proximity to divine forces. Long before names like Caesar, the terrain itself whispered power. It didn't just support civilization, it provoked it. Yet for millennia, no great city rose. The land waited, weathering time, storms, and silent migrations, until something more deliberate than survival stirred, until people began building, not just to endure, but to belong. By 4000 BCE, the slow pivot from wandering to dwelling had begun. Neolithic farmers crept into the valleys and hilltops of central Italy, bringing with them wheat seeds, clay pots, and the desire to stay. They cleared forest patches, dug shallow wells, and domesticated pigs and goats in the shadow of hills that would one day cradle an empire. This wasn't yet Rome, but it was no longer the wild. The land, once shaped by lava, was now shaped by habit. Fields formed. Burial sites hinted at shared beliefs. By the Bronze Age, around 1800 BCE, The region had grown noisy with life. Metal tools clinking, fires crackling, livestock bleating. Small tribal settlements clustered on hilltops for defence, especially the Palatine and Capitoline, whose natural ridges offered both protection and a commanding view over the Tiber's bend. Paths were beaten between them, embryonic streets. Trade trickled in from the south, bearing amber, obsidian and new ideas. But it wasn't until the Iron Age, around 1000 BCE, that the first true imprint of Proto-Rome emerged. Archaeologists have uncovered hut foundations on the Palatine Hill. Oval structures built of wattle and daub, their floors sunken for insulation, their hearths blackened with centuries of use. These huts weren't random. They were aligned, spaced, planned. This was no longer survival, it was society. These early communities, Latin tribes primarily, formed a loose web of alliances and rivalries. The site that would become Rome sat at a junction, not just of rivers and ridges, but of cultures. To the north lay the Etruscans, master builders and engineers. To the south, the Greeks had begun colonising the Italian coast, bringing with them writing, art and pantheons of gods. Rome's future DNA was already in motion, part Latin, part Etruscan, part Greek. Sometime around the 8th century BCE, a tipping point arrived. Multiple hilltop villages began to unify, not politically, but physically. Defensive walls were erected, shared spaces, like the earliest version of the Roman Forum, emerged in the low ground between the hills. Livy would later weave legend into this moment, telling of Romulus, Remus, and the she-wolf. The truth is more complex and more telling. Tribal groups chose to merge. Practicality trumped division. Unity meant strength. And so the city began, without ceremony, yet unmistakable. By 750 BCE, Rome was no longer a village, but a settlement with walls, shrines, rituals, and rule. Kings would follow, roads would stretch outward, but even now at its most embryonic, Rome already pulsed with a strange gravity. Something about this confluence of river, ridge, and road seemed to demand permanence. Its earliest leaders were likely warlords or priest-kings, figures who could read omens, rally militias, and adjudicate disputes. Under their watch, temples to forgotten gods rose beside communal granaries. Cattle grazed in what would become the Circus Maximus. A sense of identity, Romanitas, though unnamed, began to congeal, and yet the soil beneath their feet still reminded them who truly ruled. The Tiber could rise 10 metres in a day. Earthquakes cracked early masonry. Hills eroded. Every act of building required not just labour, but negotiation with nature itself. Rome wasn't just made by men, it was coaxed into being by a landscape as temperamental as it was fertile. The leap from tribal enclave to proto-city was not sudden. It took centuries of conflict, trade, adaptation, and intermarriage. But when it came, it stuck. Unlike other settlements that bloomed and faded, Rome never quite disappeared. Its location, on a defensible hill network with access to inland trade and Mediterranean routes, was too strategic. Its people, aggressive, adaptive, and deeply superstitious, were too bonded by shared struggle. By the time the kings gave way to the Republic in the late 6th century BCE, the city had crossed a threshold. It had streets, sewers, walls, and an origin myth. It had class tensions and cultural syncretism. It had ambition. Rome had become a city, not just of stone but of story, and its story was only beginning to echo. Rome did not rise quietly. It surged, brick by brick, legion by legion, from a confederation of clans into the roaring core of an empire that would call itself the Caput Mundi, the head of the world. From the late Republic through the height of the imperial era, the city grew not just in size, but in meaning. Rome stopped being a place. It became the place. By the 2nd century BCE, Rome had outgrown its hills. Victory in the Punic Wars gave it mastery over the Western Mediterranean. Grain poured in from Sicily and North Africa. Tribute flooded in from Greece and the east. The streets, once dusty with livestock and market chatter, now glittered with marble looted from Corinth and columns copied from Athens. Greek slaves taught Roman children philosophy. The conquerors were being culturally conquered, even as they extended their reach from Scotland to Syria. The city's population ballooned. Estimates range from 750,000 to over 1 million at its peak, making it the largest urban centre on Earth. A metropolis of immigrants, ex-slaves, patricians, soldiers, scribes, and dreamers. Latin was the language of law, but a dozen dialects echoed in every bathhouse and tavern. This was not homogeneity, it was organised chaos. To manage this sprawl, the Romans built with audacity. Aqueducts arched over valleys, carrying fresh water from distant hills. The Cloaca Maxima, one of the world's oldest sewer systems, flushed waste from the city's belly. Roads radiated outward, paved with volcanic rock, so precisely engineered that some still guide cars today. Public baths, like Caracalla's and Diocletian's, offered hygiene, gossip, and relief from the summer heat. Concrete, invented by Roman masons, allowed them to build bigger and faster. Vaults, domes, and temples that still instill awe today. The Forum became the nerve centre. Senators debated beneath porticos. Triumphal arches rose to commemorate victories in distant lands. Vestal virgins kept sacred flame alive, while crowds cheered gladiators to their deaths in the nearby Colosseum. Power was not just exercised here, it was choreographed. Architecture became propaganda. Every column a symbol, every arena a reminder of dominion. Augustus, Rome's first emperor, famously said he found the city brick and left it marble. His building spree reshaped the skyline. Temples to Mars and Apollo, altars to peace, and the Arapaxis, a carved hymn to imperial stability. But the Pax Romana was more than a slogan. For nearly 2 centuries, Rome stood at the centre of a vast, mostly stable network of provinces connected by trade, law, and blood. The wealth poured in, but so did tension. The poor lived in insulae, ramshackle apartment blocks 4 or 5 stories high, vulnerable to fire and collapse. The rich retreated to hillside villas with atriums and private libraries. Grain doles kept the masses fed. Games kept them distracted. Rome thrived, but it teetered. Culture flourished nonetheless. Cicero's rhetoric shaped the art of persuasion. Virgil gave the empire an origin myth in the Aeneid, linking Rome to the fall of Troy. Ovid penned seductions and scandals before being exiled by Augustus, proof that even poets weren't immune to power. Law, too, matured. The 12 tables gave way to sprawling legal codes that would echo through Europe for millennia. Faiths also multiplied. Mithraic cults met in underground chambers. Isis had her temples. Jewish communities thrived in Trastevere. And in a backstreet of this religious melting pot, a small sect called Christians began gathering, whispering of resurrection and a kingdom not of this world. The tension between Roman order and spiritual upheaval would grow, but not yet. At its height, Rome still believed in its eternity. The phrase Roma Eterna wasn't just poetry, it was policy. The emperors declared themselves gods. The city itself was sacred. Every stone laid was an act of faith in permanence. But golden ages are never static. They shimmer just before the fall. By the late 2nd century CE, cracks had formed. Plagues swept through the crowded tenements. Economic strain deepened. Barbarians pressed the borders. The emperors became more numerous and often more paranoid. Still, the city stood, weary, yes, but draped in triumphal marble and clinging to its myth of invincibility. This was Rome at its zenith, a city of spectacle and system, of philosophers and slave markets, of triumphs and tensions. It engineered not just buildings and roads, but a world view. That power could be built to last, that law could stretch across continents, that a city could bind together disparate peoples through ritual, architecture, and awe. It worked, until it didn't. The golden light would fade. but the blueprint lingered. Eternity cracked. Rome, once a machine of expansion, turned inward, fractured, drained, and at war with itself. The golden mask slipped, revealing a city beset by plagues, betrayals, and enemies, no longer confined to distant borders. The fall of Rome didn't come as a single cataclysm. It came as attrition, slow, grinding, and inevitable. The 3rd century CE brought what historians now call the crisis of the 3rd century. In less than 50 years, Rome cycled through over 24 emperors, some murdered, some never crowned. Civil war became a norm. Generals turned legions against each other. The empire split, stitched, and split again. Meanwhile, the city of Rome, still majestic in marble, struggled to hold its centre. Infrastructure sagged under population loss. The famed aqueducts fell into disrepair. Public baths closed. Earthquakes rattled domes. Plagues, likely smallpox and measles, swept through the crowded neighbourhoods. Grain supplies from North Africa grew unreliable. Bread prices soared. Riots followed. Beneath the grandeur, rot set in. And yet, amid the chaos, something transformative stirred. Christianity, once a persecuted fringe faith, began to ascend. In 312 CE, Constantine marched on Rome under a Christian banner, claiming a divine vision at the Milvian Bridge. When he triumphed, the unthinkable happened. The empire's greatest persecutor of Christians became its patron. Temples gave way to churches. Pagan rituals were banned or repackaged. The gods of Rome, Jupiter, Mars, Vesta, were dismissed by imperial decree. Power began to shift not just from Rome to Constantinople, but from Senate to altar. By the late 4th century, the city was spiritually transformed, but strategically sidelined. The Western Empire grew weak, while its eastern twin, Byzantium, thrived. Rome remained a symbol, but no longer a capital. The emperors ruled from Ravenna or Milan. Gothic warbands, sensing weakness, pushed into Italy. The unthinkable arrived in 410 CE, when Alaric and his Visigoths breached the gates. Rome was sacked, not since fighting the Gauls at the Battle of the Allia in 387 BCE had it suffered such humiliation. St. Jerome wrote bitterly, "The city which took the whole world was itself taken." The eternal city had become a ruin in real time. But it wasn't just invaders from outside. The city turned on itself. In 455, the Vandals came, less bloodthirsty than their name suggests, but thorough. They looted what gold remained, stripped temples, and captured the Empress Licinia Eudoxia. The word vandalism was born not just from violence, but from this slow peeling away of Rome's former glory. One by one, the pillars of empire fell. The Senate faded into irrelevance. The legions became mercenary, then myth. The final Western Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus, a boy, was deposed in 476 CE by a Germanic general named Odoacer. Still, the city endured, now a ghost of itself. Shrines and basilicas sprang up in the ruins of old forums. Pagan temples were quarried for marble to build cathedrals. The Colosseum became a quarry. The Roman Forum turned into a cow pasture, the Campo Vaccino. Strangers walked among columns and wondered what gods had once lived here. But even in collapse, Rome retained gravity. Pilgrims came to see the tombs of saints. Popes rose as new ruling figures, claiming spiritual authority over crumbling stones. The memory of the empire became a political tool. Charlemagne, crowned in Rome in 800 CE, claimed the title of Holy Roman Emperor, not to resurrect the old order, but to inherit its legitimacy. Rome's fall wasn't clean. It wasn't even singular. It was a series of fractures: military, cultural, environmental, spiritual. Some happened in fire, some in silence, but together they broke the back of a civilization that once claimed to last forever. And yet, the marble remained, toppled, weathered, reused. A colonnade here, a Latin inscription there, The ruins didn't vanish. They waited, as if daring some future Rome to rise again from its shattered crown. When Rome fell, it didn't vanish. It decayed in place, grand and wounded, still too important to abandon. The Senate was gone, the emperors were dust. But the city, stubborn as ever, refused to lie still. Instead, it reinvented itself, not as the head of empire, but as the heart of faith. By the 6th century, the marble city was a skeleton. Roofless temples, half-buried forums, aqueducts split and dry. Wolves prowled the outskirts. Population plummeted. Some estimates suggest fewer than 30,000 people remained, scattered in huddled enclaves amid ruins their ancestors once commanded. The Colosseum housed squatters and stables. The great public baths served as vineyards. Time didn't erase Rome, it re-inhabited it. Christianity, once Rome's underground creed, had become its new foundation. The Bishop of Rome, now the Pope, grew in stature as emperors faded. By the 8th century, the city no longer ruled the world with armies, but it ruled millions through doctrine. St. Peter's tomb, believed to lie beneath a modest basilica on the Vatican Hill, became a magnet for pilgrims. Martyrs' bones drew crowds. Processions replaced parades. Incense replaced incense. The imperial cult had become Catholic ritual. By the 14th century, after centuries of obscurity and occasional plunder, Rome stirred again. Artists, architects, and theologians began to look not away from the ruins, but into them. What they saw wasn't just rubble, it was a blueprint. The cracked domes and broken capitals of ancient Rome weren't remnants, they were raw materials. Pope Nicholas V in the 15th century began the first grand wave of urban renewal. His vision, Rome restored not as a military capital, but as the earthly mirror of heavenly Jerusalem. New streets cut through medieval tangles. Old basilicas were rebuilt. The Vatican Library was born. Then came Julius II, the warrior pope, whose ambition matched any emperor's. He commissioned Bramante to design a new saint, Peter's Basilica, bulldozing Constantine's ancient church. It would take over a century to complete, finished by none other than Michelangelo. The skyline transformed. Domes rose like celestial anchors. Raphael's frescoes unfurled divine narratives across papal walls. Caravaggio painted light like it bled from heaven. Bernini sculpted saints with veins and breath and anguish. Rome became not a city of laws, but a city of visions, part pilgrimage, part theatre. Yet reinvention wasn't just artistic, it was political. The papal states ruled vast stretches of central Italy, with Rome as the sacred capital. But power here had changed its vocabulary. No longer about conquest, it spoke in bulls, canons, and ceremony. The church wielded influence like an invisible empire, its ambassadors seated beside kings and emperors. Still, tension lingered. Rome remained a paradox, a city of God, built on the architecture of fallen gods. A place where the pagan past was both rejected and worshipped through replication. The Renaissance was not a clean resurrection. It was a collage, ruin and revival layered like fresco over faded plaster. And always, the city moved with the memory of what it once had been. Every piazza hinted at a vanished forum. Every new dome shadowed an ancient arch. Time wasn't linear here. It spiraled, looping back on itself, using the past as scaffolding. By the 17th century, Rome had been reborn as the seat of the Catholic world, a jewel of Baroque grandeur and a symbol of artistic supremacy. No longer the heart of an empire, it had become the soul of a civilization. And yet, the ground beneath its feet still shifted. Political winds would change, enlightenment would challenge dogma, revolutions would rattle its gates. But for now, in the glow of torchlight on Travertine, Rome stood again, not as it was, but as it had chosen to become. By the dawn of the 18th century, Rome had become a paradox in motion. Glorious, crumbling, venerated, and increasingly irrelevant to the political chessboard of Europe. It was still the beating heart of the Catholic world, drawing pilgrims and painters, but no longer of strategic consequence. The empires that now rose, France, Britain, Prussia, looked to Rome not as a rival, but as a museum, a sacred relic, a destination. Yet beneath its gilded altars, the soil still stirred with revolution. The 1700s saw Rome tangled in inertia. Baroque fountains sparkled, but poverty clung to its alleyways. The popes ruled as monarchs, maintaining rigid control over the papal states, even as Enlightenment ideals eroded their authority. Outside the Vatican walls, ideas of liberty, equality, and secular governance began to ferment. Then came Napoleon. In 1798, French troops marched into Rome, arrested Pope Pius VI, and declared a Roman Republic. For a moment, the old empire's ghost flickered. Rome, a republic again, albeit by foreign design. But the experiment was short-lived. Napoleon would soon crown himself emperor in Paris, and Rome, caught between Holy See and secular force, remained a pawn. Still, the spell was broken. Rome had felt the shock of modernity. The 19th century was a tug-of-war between papal control and the rising tide of Italian nationalism. Across the peninsula, city-states unified, languages standardised, flags unfurled. But Rome held out. Popes refused to surrender sovereignty. The city became an island of theocracy in a growing sea of constitutional ambition. In 1870, as Prussian armies crushed France at Sedan and Napoleon III retreated, Italian troops seized the opportunity. They marched on Rome, breached the Aurelian walls at Porta Pia, and annexed the city. The Pope retreated to the Vatican, declaring himself a prisoner. The Kingdom of Italy had a new capital. For the first time in over a millennium, Rome belonged to a secular state. It was a capital reborn but unsettled. The city underwent massive changes. New boulevards sliced through medieval neighbourhoods, tram lines buzzed, public buildings rose. Yet tension simmered. The Church refused to recognise Italy's legitimacy. The Pope refused to leave the Vatican. For nearly 60 years, two Romes existed side by side, one temporal, one spiritual, divided by more than walls. Then the 20th century arrived, and with it, the storms of steel. World War I saw Rome spared the worst of combat, but not of grief. Sons were sent to die in the Alps and trenches. The city grew hungry and angry. In the war's chaotic aftermath, a new figure marched into its void, Benito Mussolini. In 1922, the fascists came to power. Mussolini, draped in Roman nostalgia, styled himself a modern Caesar. He promised glory and order, invoking empire at every turn. Ancient ruins were cleared, Roman symbols revived, and vast avenues carved to display fascist might. The Via dei Fori Imperiali was built atop ancient forums, history bulldozed to make way for spectacle. Statues of emperors stood beside propaganda posters. It was Rome reimagined as stage set. But beneath the rhetoric was repression. Free speech vanished. Political opponents were jailed or killed, and as Mussolini aligned with Hitler, the shadow darkened. World War II brought bombing raids and fear. Though Rome was spared widespread destruction, it suffered. In 1943, the Nazis occupied the city. Jewish families were rounded up from the ghetto, some hiding behind false walls, others betrayed. On October 16th, over 1,000 Roman Jews were deported to Auschwitz. Only 16 returned. Rome was liberated in 1944 by Allied forces. The war ended, the king abdicated, and Italy became a republic. The Pope remained in the Vatican, now a sovereign city-state, after the Lateran Treaty of 1929. A cold peace settled over Rome, but it was a peace of potential. The post-war decades transformed the city. Fiat factories hummed, Cinecittà studios earned the nickname Hollywood on the Tiber, with stars like Audrey Hepburn and Gregory Peck strolling its boulevards. Rome swelled with cars, televisions, and tourists. The Trevi Fountain overflowed with coins and cinematic desire. Yet sprawl and smog came too. The eternal city became a modern metropolis. Crowded, chaotic, dazzling, cracked. Today, Rome is a mosaic. Its pieces brilliant and broken, ancient and alive. You can sip espresso in a medieval square while looking at a column laid in Julius Caesar's time. Vesper engines echo off Renaissance facades. Bureaucrats hurry past ruins where emperors once bled. There's graffiti on thousand-year-old bricks, drone footage of gladiator arenas, solar panels glinting over catacombs. Over 3,000 years of architecture crowd a single skyline. Layers upon layers, Etruscan tombs, Republican temples, Baroque domes, fascist marble, postmodern apartments, all stitched together by cobblestones that remember every footprint. Rome no longer rules the world, but it whispers to it. And in that whisper is a kind of power no empire can replicate. A city that refuses to forget. A city that survives, not by standing still, but by folding each century into the next, until past and present blur into one living ruin. Rome today is caught between the weight of its past and the tremors of its future. It remains one of the most visited cities on Earth. Over 9 million tourists a year tread its stones, snap its columns, and flood its piazzas. But behind the postcard perfection lie deep tensions: economic, environmental, and existential. The infrastructure in many places is older than the concept of infrastructure. Cracked water pipes leak into subterranean ruins. Subway construction stalls when workers hit ancient tombs, an almost daily occurrence. Traffic coils around 2,000-year-old walls not designed for combustion engines. The challenge is constant: how to be a living city without burying or being buried by its past. Climate change looms like a modern Visigoth. Summers are growing hotter, and Rome's ancient stone absorbs heat like a kiln. The city is becoming a heat island, its cobbled alleys and piazzas cooking well past sunset. Meanwhile, erratic rainfalls threaten flooding, especially from the ever-restless Tiber. Drainage systems, some of them Roman, strain under storms they were never built to endure. Rising water levels are no longer a Venetian problem. Then there's population churn. The historic centre grows quieter each year as locals flee high rents and short-term rentals hollow out neighbourhoods. Young Romans face sky-high unemployment and often leave for more modern cities with more modern economies. In their place come tourists and digital nomads, sometimes enriching, often transient. The soul of the city, its trattorias, corner shops, family-run grocers, fights to survive. But Rome has reinvented itself too many times to count it out. Across the Tiber in Testaccio and Ostiense, industrial ruins are becoming art hubs. Startups are taking root in converted convents. Archaeologists now use LiDAR and 3D scanning to study without excavation, allowing history to surface without destruction. Solar panels crown apartment blocks within view of the Pantheon. Car-free zones are growing. Bikes return where chariots once raced. The Vatican, once a bastion of tradition, now speaks about climate justice and digital ethics. The Pope tweets, "Grass grows in the Colosseum." And in the crypts and catacombs, researchers search not just for relics, but for resilience. Rome's future may not be a straight road. It never was. But its unique power lies in contradiction. Sacred and profane, ruin and rebirth, memory and motion. Whether navigating AI regulation or refugee policy, rising heat or crumbling stone, Rome remains a mirror for the world. A city where the past is not just preserved, but challenged, questioned, and reshaped with each passing day. It may not rule empires anymore, but it still rules imaginations. And in the age of identity crisis, Rome offers something rare, a place that remembers. Rome didn't survive because it stayed the same. It survived because it never stopped becoming. In every stone and shadow it asks, what will we leave behind? And will it be strong enough to carry someone else's beginning?